Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome wherever you're listening or watching us here on USA Global TV and Radio. Today's show is going to be a little bit different for a couple of reasons. The first is Dr. Jacqueline is travelling, so I was going to host this myself. And the second is we were due to have a guest who unfortunately is unable to join us. We just wanted to share our thoughts and prayers with them for everything to be resolved. So it's going to be just me today, but we're going to still carry on with the topic, which was Insights for Women Experiencing Emotional Distress. And whilst we've titled it for Women Experiencing Emotional Distress, the same is true for anybody, whatever their gender, that is facing emotional distress. So what we're going to try and do in this next half an hour, 40 minutes, is share with you some of the insights that we've learned over our studies and about how we can get better coping strategies for those moments when we are feeling emotionally drained. And we all have those moments where life feels like it's just a little bit too much. I know I've shared before on this show where, at various times in my life, things haven't gone according to plan. And I remember in one particularly emotionally distressful moment, I really didn't know what else to do. I remember laying on the kitchen floor thinking I didn't know how to breathe, and clearly I did know how to breathe and I'm still here. But in that moment, everything just felt too much and I couldn't work out what on earth to do next. And that for me was a real shock, from having been somebody who normally was relatively in control and ran big organizations, to suddenly feel so desperate, so helpless. And the voice in my head was so plausible. And I said some dreadful, dreadful things to myself. And over the last 7 years since that incident happened, I've spent a lot of time with therapists, with psychiatrists, studying why do we do these things to ourselves and how can we find better ways of helping ourselves or finding the right support in those times of trouble. And one of the first things that I learned on that journey was the fact that in the absence of a fact, our brain will create a story. So it will fill in the gaps. So if we've only got so many facts or we can't see all of the answers, our brain will start to fill in a story about that. And then we believe the story. We believe it to be true. And it's so plausible that we make it our reality. And so one of the first tricks that they taught me was to ask myself, what's actually happening and what am I making it mean? Because the other thing I learned on this journey was that our emotional brain responds 24 times faster than our thinking brain. 24 times. So when something happens, we make it mean something because we have an emotional response to it. And that's why we can see or view a situation in a very different way than somebody else may see or view the same situation, because we've both reacted to it potentially in a different way. It's attached itself to a different emotional meaning for us. So one of the questions I ask myself all the time is, what is actually happening and what have I made it mean? I remember many years ago doing a big redundancy program, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And it really brought this home to me, because what would happen is we'd be dealing with a certain part of the facts at the time in moment, because we were going through a consultation process, and you don't know what the end outcome is. You can only go through the steps that you've got in front of you, and for it to be a meaningful consultation. And so we were doing that, but the people I was talking to would have been leaping forward to, well, then that's going to mean this, and that's going to mean that's going to mean the other. And it's like, well, they're just stories. They're just stories. They haven't happened yet. And in these moments, facts are your friend. And I probably said it that many times that, you know, people started calling it my little catchphrase and facts are your friends. But it's true of everything in life, which is asking ourselves, what is factually happening and what am I making it mean? That's not because we're trying to make things up. It's not because we're trying to be dishonest. It's because our brains are wired to fill in the gaps, and we'll fill in those gaps with a story. And sometimes those stories aren't positive stories. They're stories that add further burden to us, particularly when we're in those moments of emotional distress. So if we think about it for a moment, the things that we are fearful of haven't actually happened yet. We've got to imagine them. That's why we're fearful of them. So we've got to create them in our brain. Think about what they're going to feel like, what we do in that situation, how we're going to move forward. The same is also true of everything we're hopeful for. Everything we're hopeful for also hasn't happened yet. And so we have to imagine it. We have to create it in our brain and bring that picture to life. So what we're hopeful for and what we're fearful of are both created in exactly the same brain. They are equally credible and equally likely. And yet we choose to believe that the thing we're fearful of is more likely and more credible. And so one of the things that I uncovered on this journey is that our brain's a little bit like a sat nav in my simple layman terms. So whatever we tell it is where we're going to go. So if we decide to focus in on the thing we're fearful of, our subconscious brain thinks that's what we want, because that's its one very significant flaw. Our subconscious brain has no sense of humor. It doesn't understand the difference between helping and harming. So it doesn't know if what we're saying to it is something we want or something we don't want. It just knows we're saying it. And it is designed to then try and filter that into our life. Have you ever had those moments where you were going to buy a new car and you've thought about it, and you know the make, you know the model, you know the colour, that you've really pictured it, you know which one it's going to be, and all of a sudden all you can see is that car. Everyone's got one. It's like they're everywhere. And it's not because there's more of them around. It's because your subconscious brain is filtering them into view. It knows, or it thinks, that that is something that you want, and therefore it brings it in. Unfortunately, the same is true if you're thinking about something you don't want. Your brain will filter that into view, and so you'll suddenly feel like there's more of it. You'll hear those sayings that say, I'm on a lucky streak, or I'm on a losing streak. Because we're focused on the luck, more luck comes. Because we're focused on the loss, more loss comes. And yet nobody tells us this. So we end up having the most powerful tool to change our worlds, and we don't understand how to use it. And as well as it being our very best friend, it can be our very worst enemy. And I know for me, when I was facing my emotional distress, I couldn't ask for help. I couldn't share it with anybody. I couldn't possibly tell anybody some of the things that were going on in my head, because they were awful things. They were things I would never dream of saying to another human being. And yet I say them to myself all the time, until I realized that actually I've got a little girl, and as many of you know who watch the show, she is my North Star. And she guides me in everything. But I realized that she won't learn by what I say. She'll learn by how I am and who I am and how I show up. And so if I didn't change the voice in my head, I'd teach her to talk to herself in exactly the same way. And that was heartbreaking, to think that she might be so evil to herself. And so it really got me in thinking about, how do we change this? How do we how do we make it easier to navigate the times when life gets challenging, when life throws us all the things we don't want, and leaves us struggling to deal with them. And for me, there's been a few things. So one of them is getting those better coping strategies. The second one is a reframing of your thinking. So when we're stuck in one of those loops where we're telling ourselves that it's never going to get better, we're always on our own, there's no way out of this, it's just hopeless, then actually it's about asking ourselves a different question. So acknowledging that that's how we feel, because you can't trick the brain. You've got to go with where it's taking you. So acknowledge that that's how you feel alone, that you feel distressed, that you feel like you're unable to move forward, that you feel like it's only you, because very often when we're in that state, we do feel like everybody else is doing so much better. And then you have to ask yourself, and physically ask yourself the question, because it has a different trigger to your brain. What are the things I could do, even if they seem insignificant? What small step could I take that's going to improve where I am now? Or what have I done in my past that gives me some hope that I will be able to do something similar again and resolve the situation? So you've acknowledged what's happened that's not going in your favor. You ask yourself if there's any evidence that things could go in your favor, either from your past or because you can see a small, seemingly insignificant step that you can take. And then the third one is to ask yourself, if this were, and I always use Scarlett because she is my North Star, but insert somebody that you really care about. If this were Scarlett, what advice would I give them in this situation? Because if it were one of our loved ones, if it was somebody we really cared about, we'd be finding the steps for them. We'd be helping them to see where there might be an opportunity to make an improvement. The sad reality is, very often the one person we don't love enough is ourselves. And that's not because I'm suggesting we all suddenly become selfish, egocentrics, but actually we have to love ourselves enough to get through, to have some self-compassion, to have some self-care. And I was not very good at that for a lot of years, really bad at it. So externally, the view was, I was really kind, I was always really helpful, I'd do anything for anybody. The reality was I would do all of that, I wouldn't do a thing for myself. I was evil to myself and thought anything that I did for me was just selfish. And now I realise that actually we've got to have balance. We have to be able to do that self-reflection and recognise that it's not selfish to take a moment for yourself. It's not selfish to do something that is going to refill your cup, because the reality is we can't fill from an empty cup. If we don't do something to ensure that we've got what we need to survive, we're not going to be able to help more people join us and survive what they're going through as well. So I think when I kind of pulled it all back, it was making sure you'd got a number of things that could help you. And the more tools that you can have in that toolkit, the better it is, because not each one of them will work for every person, and not each one of them will work for you every time. So having a few of them really helps you to try the odd thing and go, okay, that didn't work today. Let me try something else. And also one of the things that I did was set myself kinder goals. We live in a despair and compare society. So we look at the seemingly perfect lives of everybody else and we compare them to the messy reality of our own. And we find ourselves lacking. We find ourselves not measuring up, not being that perfect airbrushed image. But that's not reality. The reality is everybody's life has something in it that isn't going perfectly. They say into every life a little rain may fall, and that's true, but that's not the bit we always share. We don't share the struggle. We don't share the things that didn't go right. We don't share the things that don't demonstrate that everything's a breeze, and that makes it so much harder. I was doing a show earlier this week with a gentleman who was sharing about his own struggles with mental health and how he hadn't seen it coming. He'd been running a major global organization, really high-powered role, was renowned in his industry, and then just like that, it hit him, and his mental health was just overwhelming. And that's because he hadn't put in any of these strategies, these steps, to be able to allow him to keep refilling that cup, to make sure that he wasn't pushing himself to burn out and to overwhelm. And he now talks with hundreds of people all over the world. And what's fascinating is when he shares that, thinking that people would go, wow, I'd never have considered that. Instead, people want to share their story. They want to share how it's happened to them, or it's happened to somebody they know and somebody they love. And it got me thinking that that's possibly the number one thing that we can do to start off with, is talk to somebody, anybody, but talk to somebody. Don't let it stay in your head. I always advise people to get what I call the Thrive Hive. So I've got my Thrive Hive. I'm really grateful that I also get to be in a few other people's Thrive Hives. And what your Thrive Hive is the 4 or 5 or 6 people that will always have your back. They're always going to be honest with you. They're going to have your best interests at heart. And for me, in my Thrive Hive, I need to have a bit of a mix of people. I need somebody who's going to give me tough love, because sometimes that's just what I need. The person who's going to tell me to just get on with it. But I know that that isn't the person I need in every situation. Sometimes I need someone who's going to sugar the pill and just give me a cup of tea and the space to just talk without needing them to give me any solution whatsoever, just the space to talk. Because that for me is one of the ways that I find I can get my emotions back under control. And sometimes it's asking people, you're telling them what it is you need. I just want you to listen. I don't want you to give me solutions. I don't want you to solve it for me. I just love for you to hold the space for me to share. So I've got a mix of people in my group, and the people whose groups I'm in, I've got a mix of. I have one friend who will phone me up and say, put me on speakerphone, go and get a glass of wine and leave me for 5 minutes because I just want to rant. Now, of course, I never do leave for 5 minutes. I just sit and stand and listen. I don't say anything. I just stay on the phone because I want to make sure that if she does need me, I can jump in. But she knows that first 5 minutes, she just wants to be able to rant and get it out. And if that works, she should do that. And she's got someone who's willing to do that with her, to give her that space. So finding out, like having that group of people that you've already spoken to say, if I just needed to like ring up and rant, or I just needed to grab a coffee, would that be okay? And likewise, if you ever needed it, I can do it for you. So we can do that share, because in those moments where we're feeling distressed, we can often help other people, and that gives us some relief from thinking about our own challenges. The other one that I've found has been really helpful for me personally is starting to think about the things that I have achieved so far. Because when I get myself in one of those areas where my emotions have taken over, I can only think of all the things that I can't do. I can only think of all of the things that might go wrong, that haven't gone well yet, that I don't know all of the answers to get me out of this solution. So thinking back over situations that I have felt like that before, and then but I've come out the other side and things have got better, or thinking about some of the things that I can do, some of the strengths that I have got. I remember in one particularly challenging time when I was going through an illness and breakdown of my marriage and a whole job change. I mean, if you were going to do it, let's do them all at the same time. And everything just got too much. But I remember my friend saying to me, I don't understand how you just keep going, and why you like kind of picked up this new job and you're going to go and do something else. And I was like, because when everything goes out of control, I have to cling to the one thing that I do know how to do in that moment. And that becomes my life raft in the messy waters of my mind until I can find the next life raft, the next thing that I can find to do well. It's just how it works for me. It won't work like that for everybody. But having a whole host of these things allows you to try them. One of the other things that I was able to do is really start to understand kind of why our brains get so overwhelmed with these things. And a lot of it is because we've made emotions a bad thing. We've made them something to be not talked about, to be scared of. We even use it in how they're just being emotional. Particularly, that's labelled at women in work. I've seen a lot in the last 30 years. So, oh, she'll just be emotional. So we're all emotional. We also get told to leave our emotion at the door, which, in my opinion, is one of the daftest sentences we can ever say, because our emotional brain responds 24 times faster. So even if we think heading into the room, that's okay because I've left my emotions at the door, our emotional brain can kick in whenever it wants to. And our logical brain is too slow to stop it. And that's true not just of ourselves, but of everybody we meet. And therefore, one of the number one skills that I learned as a leader was how to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Doesn't mean to say you don't find those situations still uncomfortable, but you acknowledge that actually we are people who are dealing with messy emotions, and we have no idea when my messy emotions are going to come into play, or when your messy emotions are going to come into play, or heaven forbid they all come into play at the same time. And how are we going to navigate that situation? So I think it's kind of looking at some of those. How do we, in those moments of distress, how do we find the bits that we can do, even if they seem really insignificant? As I say, when I was going through my really tough time, one of the goals I set myself was to adult appropriately for 12 hours. Now, that may not seem like a particularly outstanding goal to achieve, but in that moment, that was as much as I wanted to push myself. And as long as that didn't last for the rest of my life, which I'm glad to say it didn't, that was okay. It allowed me to do something and acknowledge that I could achieve something, I could get through. And then I may have given myself a slightly bigger goal. But I think what I was very guilty of, and I know from having interviewed hundreds of people in the last 6 years, what a lot of us are guilty of is we set us, in those moments, we set ourselves overwhelming goals and then get lost in not knowing how we're ever going to achieve those because we've made them so overwhelming. And that therefore gets us in that place where we spiral deeper into our emotional distress rather than being able to start to find a way to control it and to manage it. Journaling is something else that people have found super useful. And I'll be honest, I'm a bit of an ad hoc journaler, but in moments it does really work for me. Like sitting in a quiet place, probably playing some music, and just writing, not thinking about it, not looking at the words, not judging myself for my poor spelling and bad grammar, but just letting the words flow is a great way for me to regain my calmness. But I think equally, with a lot of these things, we only do them when we're in the situation. So we talk about cure, but we don't do anything to prevent them coming up again. And that for me is one of the things that I have learned to change in my life. My cup was always full, and therefore the minute something else came in that was a big emotional disaster, I hadn't got much bandwidth. So it suddenly overwhelmed very quickly. Whereas now I actually plan into every day some moments where I can just reflect, or I can journal, or I can dance like a crazy person in the kitchen and hope none of the neighbours are watching. Whatever it is that makes me just feel joyful or peaceful or calm, trying to make sure I factor that into my day every day and making it a conscious choice. Because I used to be very guilty of saying, I can't do that, I'm too busy. I've got a business to run, I'm a single parent, I've got after school clubs and things, I've got other bits that need to be done. But I realise now my reality is I could find the time for it, but I would have to choose to not do something else. So it had to be about conscious choice. And putting that in has really helped me to ensure that I've got that little bit of bandwidth. I've got that little bit of give in my emotional bank account that allows me to see things in a more measured approach. So when they come in, instead of it being so overwhelming as it used to be, now I can look at it and go, okay, well, I don't even know where to start with that bit, but I could possibly do this bit here. And I know who I can phone to get some support. So I can contact my Thrive Hive. I know I've got some tools and strategies that are in my arsenal that allow me to think about it from a different viewpoint. And that's all it is. It's about trying to see the situation from all views, because we think that the way we've seen it is the reality. And yet we live in a world of polarity. For every up, there's a down. For every left, there's a right, which means for everything we believe to be true, the opposite is also possible. If we think about it, I think it was Einstein that said, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Well, the same is true for every thought and every feeling. For every thought and feeling we have, there is an equal and opposite thought and feeling that can be had. It's capturing the power of being curious about it. Our brains were designed to leap, to make a decision, to come up with an answer. And so one of the other tools that I use in my arsenal is curiosity. So I'll say to myself, I'm really interested. Why am I so convinced of this? Why am I so convinced that they're wrong? Why am I so convinced that this can't happen? Because it just challenges a different part of your brain to view it from a slightly different angle. And you'd be amazed then what steps come into play. I think it was Michael Jordan who said, you don't have to see the whole staircase. You just have to take the next step. And it really is true. When I've taken that step, even if it was really small and insignificant, the next step comes into view because we're changing our vantage point. We're moving forward. And for me, my greatest probable insight that I had through dealing with emotional distress is not to wait for the big solution. I was very guilty of holding on because I knew that eventually all would be revealed and everything would be resolved. And it didn't end up like that. Pretty much like most successful people, it appears to be overnight, and yet the reality is when you dig into the story, it was in the constant addition of little small steps that they accumulated to become that big reveal. And I found that that has also been true when I've been dealing with that emotional distress, is instead of waiting for the big reveal, is take the little steps, and before you know it, you're in a much better place than you were before. So I think it's acknowledging and understanding that even if you feel like you're in it on your own, you're not on your own. Other people feel just like you, and that you can find those people and connect with them, and sharing our stories, sharing our lived experience, hopefully can help other people find ways to deal with their current lived experience or their past lived experience. My little girl suffers from anxiety, and one of the things I did when she started when she was first diagnosed was I went and did a degree in understanding children and young adolescents' mental health so that I could better understand what was going on for her and hopefully come up with some ways of helping and supporting her. And it was a fascinating course, but it really has helped me as well in managing my own emotional distress, because understanding that actually it's perfectly normal for us to have these moments where everything gets on top of us. It's not because we're not good enough. It's not because we're doing it wrong. It's not because we're not clever enough or strong enough. It's because this is how we're wired to be. We'll have moments where it all just gets too much. And one of the things that it shared with me that I've learned, and I've followed this in my adult life as well, is finding some of those strategies. So for children that are suffering, they might not be able to journal their words or say how they're feeling, but they can draw pictures of where it is. And one of the things that they also shared, which I love and I use for myself as much as I use with Scarly, was when you've got something that's really going wrong, that's taking over, and it's all you can think about, is you get a piece of paper and you draw a massive circle on the outside and a little one on the inside, which is you. And you write on one side, or you draw the picture of the thing that is currently overwhelming you. And once you've written it, you then write on the next 3 more things, which are things that bring you joy. So think for a moment, I'm not ignoring this, but what would be something I'd love to do? What would be something I'd love to be happening to me right now? And you put those 3 in, and then you've got this wheel of thoughts. And you ask yourself, or you ask your child, okay, so all of those are there, so they're all available for us to talk about. Which one would you like to really think about? So you're not ignoring the emotional problem that is there, but you're allowing yourself to think about something that you would like to be doing instead of the thing that's going horribly wrong. And that allows you to actually have a moment of peace to refill up that emotional cup. So the things it talked about, which I've found have been super helpful as an adult, have been making sure that you've got a solid support network, having a safe space where you can share without fear of repercussion, but also without fear of having your power taken away. We talked about this in the show just a couple of weeks ago on unsolicited feedback, where people say what you should do. And I always think, if I tell somebody what you should do, I'm telling them I don't think they're capable of making the choice or the decision. So I never tell anybody what they should do. I tell them what they could consider to do, and then trust that they've got all the skills they need to be able to try those out and work out which one works for them. And I guess that's what we're trying to do in today's show, is not tell you what you should do, but share with you some insights from our lived experience of ways that we have found that we can help ourselves when things get overwhelming. So for me, if I just recap on those as we're coming towards the end, the first one is understanding that our brain is wired to create a story to fill the space of a fact. Just knowing that really helped me, because before I thought everything was factual, it was in my head, because I wasn't trying to lie or make it up. Once I realized that actually only part of it was factual and the rest of it had been filled in by stories, and I could ask myself, which of this is factually right and which bit isn't definitely factual just yet, allowed me to see some positives that were in there, or some opportunities. The next one, it was asking myself, what's actually happening and what have I made it mean? Which allowed me to just catch myself in those moments where I've added it to things that have gone on in my past and decided it's the same thing, because we love a label, and then we know what that is and we can work with it. So challenging yourself in those moments, being curious with yourself. So why do I think that? Why am I so convinced that's wrong? Why am I not here? What might I be able to do? Allows you to just get your brain to start thinking about the whole 360 of what's going in. You've then got the one about reframing that thinking. So acknowledging what you're telling yourself now. So I can't do this, it's too much, I'm not enough, whatever it is, acknowledging that. Then asking yourself, Is there any other opportunities? Has there been anything in my past that would allow me to think about this differently? Oh, Jeffrey, thank you so much. It's lovely to have you here. So thinking about those parts. And then the third one is put in somebody that you care about. As I say, I always use Scarlett. If this was Scarlett, what advice would I give her? And then take that advice, because it just puts you in that position of love and care. When we're thinking about the people that we love and care about, we don't want them to come to any harm. And so the suggestions that we come up with come from a place of love and joy, something that we are often unable to do for ourselves. So it just helps in that trick and that reframe. Then you've got all the things that you can do that just give you moments for yourself. So that could be meditation, it could be journaling, it could be self-reflection, it could be listening to music, it could be reading a book, it could be dancing like a lunatic in the kitchen. My neighbours are clearly going to be looking in from here on out to see how mad I am in those moments. But just finding something that allows you to reconnect with you. And then get your Thrive Hive. Make sure you've got the people around you that are going to give you that love and support, and that are going to give you a safe space for you to share whatever is going on, and set the boundaries with them. Very often, if we're not clear with people, I just want you to listen. I don't want you to give me a solution. I don't want you to fix my problem. I would just love it if you would hold the space for me and let me just get it out of my head. Because sometimes just saying it out loud, when you hear the words out of your head, actually said out loud with another person in the room, it changes how you hear them. And you can see for yourself often how there might be a different solution. And make sure that you don't try and do it all on your own. Other people are in the same position or have been in the same position. They can share their lived experience and hopefully help you. And if anybody does need any help or any advice, get in touch, reach out, because it's in doing it together that we will get through any of these challenges. And when we look back on them, we realize that actually it was when we asked for help, it was when we reached out, when we shared. And for me, the sharing piece is probably the number one part, because I often will have something that I've been telling myself for days, and it sounds so real and it sounds so plausible. And then the minute I say it in front of another human being, I'll be like, it's all right, I just heard for myself. And I've come up with a better way, a better solution. So I think it's that self-care, self-compassion, and self-reflection, and making sure that you factor into every day some time just for you. And even if it's just a little thing, I recently lost my father, and in palliative care, when I was asking how I could help my little girl, they advised me that at her age, we go through what we call puddling. And that is, things can be going okay, and then all of a sudden we'll jump into a puddle of grief and everything will overwhelm us. And just as quickly as we jump into it, we can jump out of it. And having reflected on my journey and my family's journey, and looking at us as we've gone through that, whilst we're saying that that is what happens to our children, I see that that's what happens to us as adults as well. And we can sometimes feel guilty for that. We can feel guilty that we're having a moment of joy when we're in something that is so overwhelmingly stressful. And yet that moment of joy is what is going to help us get over the thing that is causing us the emotional distress. I hope this has been useful. Thank you to everybody who's been listening and watching and joining in. Until next time, take great care, and I hope you have every happiness. Thank you.